It's really wonderful news. It's very exciting. And as you mentioned, the real promise here is that it's one shot and the cold chain isn't quite as intense. And so it can be refrigerated. So I think that is overall very promising, not only for the US, but really the entire world.
Well, how does it change the timeline, Professor, when we're thinking about widespread vaccination, not just here in the United States, but around the world? Because one issue with the mRNA vaccines from Pfizer and Moderna is the storage issue. And this needs real, high-tech refrigerators to keep them very, very cold for periods of time that aren't accessible in many parts of the world.
That's right. So the Johnson & Johnson vaccine does not need that intensity. And so overall, we're going to be able to move this vaccine a little bit easier. And again, one shot in the arm and we're done. That is very, very important. But I think the other thing we have to realize is even though this is wonderful news, the thing that we're now excuse me, also looking at is that it can't just be about one variant anymore. And so there is a little bit concern about how this vaccine in particular is effective towards the South African variant.
When will we know that?
So there is a little bit of data coming out right now from Johnson & Johnson. They reported about a 57% efficacy against B1351, which is the South African variant. And overall, we're always happy when we're above 50%. I think we have been in a little bit of a euphoric state over some of these vaccines that have come before when we're hitting 95%, even 85% in terms of efficacy. So we have to balance our expectation here.
So talk about that.
Perfect.
Yeah, talk about that a little bit because, there was a lot of chatter when this news came out at 8 a.m. Wall Street time and focus on this 66% figure. The vaccine prevented 66% of moderate to severe cases of COVID-19. And I think a lot of people were comparing that to the 95 and 94% efficacy that we saw from the mRNA vaccines. 66 is still really good, right?
It is. It's still really good. I mean, this virus is really, it's changing quickly. It's winning this pandemic. And so what we need is very quick immunologic pressure. So we are making a bigger boat with these additional vaccines. So Johnson & Johnson, there's also additional information about Novavax coming out today as well. And so that's a fourth vaccine, different technology. Very good when we're talking about supply chain, right? So we need to make sure if we're diversifying these vaccines a little bit, we're not going to run low on one chemical or low on one part that's needed for all the vaccines because they're different. So we're avoiding some of those problems. But we do have to balance this idea that some of them are going to work better than others. Some of them are going to work better than others for specific variants.
So can we talk a little bit about the technology that's in this Johnson & Johnson vaccine also versus Novavax versus the mRNA technology that's used in the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines?
Sure. So we know a lot about the mRNA technology where they just take that little snippet of the instructions, the recipe for how to produce the spike protein. Your body reads that, makes the spike protein. The Johnson & Johnson is a virus vector. So they take an adenovirus from a chimpanzee and they modify it a little bit so that when it comes into your body, you again can produce some of those spike proteins and your antibodies respond to that. So it's all about mounting this response to the specifically the spike protein. So we really need that antibody response here. And then Novavax is totally different. So it's a coronavirus protein plus soap bark tree plus moth cells in order to produce, it's very interesting, in order to produce the spike protein that then your body again responds to. So the technologies are a little bit different in essentially how your body receives or makes, or both, the spike protein. And then, of course, all of that spike protein is there for the number one reason, which is to get your body to mount an antibody response.
When we think about vaccines that have been in use for years, do the vaccines from Johnson & Johnson and Novavax, do they more closely represent or more similar to vaccines that have been used for years versus the mRNA vaccines from Pfizer and Moderna, which we know until now have never been used in humans before?
So viral vector vaccines like the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, they have been used before. And actually Johnson & Johnson specifically had an adenovirus vector vaccine produced for the Ebola crisis. So this is not brand spanking new technology the way kind of mRNA in terms of coming to market was. Novavax is definitely different and new. I think one of the things that we can't underestimate here is just what this pandemic is doing for science. I come from the field of HIV. HIV revolutionized the way that we understood the immune system. And I think coronavirus is revolutionizing the way we make vaccines. I think one of the other points about the variants and how quickly things are changing is that we need vaccines that can be a bit more nimble. The mRNA vaccines will probably be the first to be able to kind of pivot and create a vaccine that becomes even more effective and efficacious against mutations and changes, variants here that we're seeing in coronavirus. But it's all to be seen. I mean, this is happening in such real time. It's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to overlook the silver lining here. I mean, this has been just a tragic period in our history, a tragic period for so many of us. But I think when it comes to science and the developments that we've seen, we cannot be forgetting those. I just want to end talking a little bit, Professor, about where we are when it comes to vaccinating the U.S. population. According to Bloomberg's vaccine tracker, about 6% of the population in the U.S. has had at least one dose of the vaccine. What are your thoughts on where we are right now?
We've got to get more shots in arms, and no public health official will tell you any different. We've got to continue to move. I do think some amazingly promising things have happened in the last week. We see more states and local governments who are standing up mass vaccination centers, even if they don't have essentially enough vaccine to really make best use of those centers all day, every day yet. With these other vaccines coming down the pipeline, hopefully we will be there very soon, where all of these mass vaccination centers will just be flooded with vaccines. The other thing that we're seeing a lot of places do, which is so key, they're taking the virus into communities that need it the most. And I think there are going to be some amazing best practices to learn from here. I know I'm off to DC later today to help stand up a clinic in a low-income housing unit for seniors.
Wow.
And this is the kind of thing we need to be doing. We need to be taking it to the people who need it most. And that is a part of equity when we're talking about vaccine distribution, meeting people where they are and getting vaccine to the highest risk first.
A really, really important part of the conversation. Professor Carrie Althoff, Associate Professor of Epidemiology at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Thank you, as always, for your time, Carrie. We should note that the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health is supported by Michael R. Bloomberg, founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies.
The biggest stories the moment they happen from around the globe. Subscribe to Bloomberg Quick Take now for insight in an instant.